In the last episode, we discussed many things regarding Satan's location. We looked at his tactics and how he is still currently deceiving the world. We saw how, unlike popular opinion, Satan is not underground. No, he's still out there and still actively trying to deceive the world. And when you realize that Satan is not locked up underground, but he's still around, actively trying to mislead the masses, you begin to realize why the only truth that you can trust is biblical truth. Now, the last video inevitably brought up more insights to discuss. So today we are going to address many questions regarding the fall of Satan, the origin of Nephilim, and the angelic wars in heaven. Stay tuned. So one thing that we looked at in the past video is how in Revelation chapter 12, it speaks of how there will be an angelic battle in the heavens when Satan and his fallen angels are thrown down into the earth realm. In essence, after this battle takes place, Satan and his fallen angels will no longer be able to roam the heavens. And we see that in Revelation 12, verse 8, as it says, "And they lost their place in heaven." So, after this battle, Satan and his fallen angels will no longer have a place in the heavens to roam. Now, automatically, when you hear the word heaven, we often think of the throne room of God, right? We only think of the high heaven. However, in this verse, we see that the Greek word for heavens here can often refer to the sky as well. It can refer to the atmosphere and even the universe. And so this is why many interpret this passage as referring to when Satan will ultimately lose his ability to roam and traverse the universe. Apparently, this is what will happen after this battle. He will lose or be dethroned from that ability. Now, this is interesting because many of us either believe that the angelic battle in Revelation 12 happened before the world began, or that it refers to something that will happen in the future. And so those are usually the two sides. Either it was a past thing or it's a future thing. So how can we investigate that? Well, one thing we can do to have more clarity on this is to see if there is anything in the Bible that indicates that Satan is currently roaming the universe. Then we will know if this battle took place in the past or if it is a future event. Now, of course, in the previous video, we did see how Paul writes in Ephesians 6:12 that we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. So this verse clearly shows that the forces of evil are currently in the heavenly places. Now, this right here is a translation from the ESV version. However, if you were looking at the King James version, you would see that it reads that the satanic forces are where? In high places. So to get down to the bottom of this, we really need to look at the original Greek words that were used. And one thing that we have to remember is that the Bible was not written in the English translations that we have today, or even the English translations that we have had for centuries. The Old Testament was originally written in Hebrew, and the New Testament was originally written in Greek. And the amazing thing is, God has so graciously allowed our generation to have Bible tools that allow us to investigate the original Hebrew and Greek words. Scholars have recovered many ancient manuscripts, some of the earliest existing copies, and placed the original words that were used in these Bible tools that we can all access. And so this is huge. You see, many who are against God and the Bible will say things like this. They will say, "How can you trust the Bible? There are so many different translations. It's not accurate, and some verses have been changed." I'm sure you've heard that argument. They will say, how can you trust this thing where there's so many different variances? But now you can respond to them how that argument doesn't really hold up anymore. Because today we can ourselves see the original Hebrew and Greek words. We can do the research and see what the original words were. And so in our generation, that argument is outdated. So if we want to see, what does it mean when it says that the satanic forces are ruling in the heavenly places? All we have to do here is see what the original Greek word for heavenly places is. So here I'm on the Blue Letter Bible site. We're looking at the King James Version, and as it says in verse 12, that we war against the satanic forces, the spiritual wickedness, where in high places. And so what we want to do is see what is the original Greek word that was used for high places. Well, let's go to tools here, and we see that when we scroll down, the word that was translated into the word high is the word epiphanius. And epiphanius refers to what? Existing in the heavens, things that take place in heaven, the celestial regions. And the interesting thing is, in the King James Version, this same Greek word was used for the word heavenly many times in the scripture. We see that it was used for heavenly here. It was used for heavenly in John, in 1 Corinthians, and Ephesians. So this word usually refers to things heavenly. And in fact, the only time it's ever used for high is just in that one passage. And so this is why it is still accurate to say the domain of where these spiritual forces of darkness are in high, or you could say heavenly places, because that same word there is used to translate the word heavenly. And so in this instance, because the Greek word refers to the heavenly realm, it is more accurate to have a perspective of the domain of darkness, of the domain of Satan, as not some place underground where he's ruling, but ruling or roaming around in heavenly or high places. So if Satan and his forces are currently roaming around in the heavenly realm, has Revelation 12, verse 8 happened yet? Because it clearly says that when he and his forces are thrown down, they will lose their place in the heavens. So you see why this is causing some now to wonder if the battle in Revelation 12 has happened. And, that's something that we looked at in the previous episode. And I mentioned how I can understand why some would say that the fall of Satan is a future event, because clearly we see that he's roaming the heavens and still deceiving the world. I mean, you can look at the world and see how there's so much satanic activity. It's obvious that he is still active. He's not completely locked away. However, I can also see the other perspective that says that he already fell from heaven. As we know, Jesus said that he saw Satan fall as lightning, correct? And we know that Satan roams throughout the earth seeking who he can devour. So what do we say in response to this? Well, I want to first say that we greatly appreciate your comments, because your comments have been so insightful, and we love how the Holy Spirit is working through you to reveal things and insight to you as well. Because with this last video, there were a few comments that I thought were so interesting regarding this. A few of you commented and mentioned something very interesting. You said, what if the angelic battle in Revelation 12, what if it's not just a singular one-time event? What if the angelic battle in Revelation 12 is a prophetic summary of the angelic wars that have been taking place over the ages? And so I thought about that, and, after some pondering, I think that is another good perspective, actually. Some of you mentioned how, yes, initially Satan was kicked out of the heavens with his fallen angels for having pride and having evil intentions. And ever since then, he has been in numerous battles with the archangel Michael and the other angels of light. Some of you even quoted the book of Daniel, chapter 10, which speaks of how the archangel Michael was in an angelic battle with the forces of darkness, even back then. And also we saw in the book of Job how Satan was not completely cast out of the heavens, because he was able to worm his way into the high heaven so that he could approach God for the purpose of trying to accuse Job. And so it does seem as if there has been an ongoing conflict between the angels of darkness and the angels of light for thousands of years. And if that is the case, it would make sense if the angelic battle depicted in Revelation 12 is perhaps a summary of when Satan is first kicked out of heaven, and then it tells of these frequent angelic battles that he has as he tries to accuse the people of God. And finally, in the passage, we see that there will come a moment when Satan is ultimately kicked out of the heavenly realms and is only allowed around the earth realm. So yeah, I would say that that position is a worthy argument to add into the equation of perspectives. And so again, we're opening up the floor. What do you think about that point of view? Please share in the comments how you consider this and how you interpret Revelation 12. Now, I do think that there is more evidence within the text that indicates that this angelic battle in Revelation 12 likely did not completely take place before creation. And I think if you look at Revelation 12, verse 9, there's an indicator of that. Look at what it reads. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Verse 10. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. So here we see that it says that he was thrown down as one who accuses the people of God, and that he was accusing believers before God day and night. So if this event here happened before humanity was even created, who would he have been accusing? Right? So you see why some scholars are saying that this is not just a past event, because we clearly see here that he has been accusing us, the brothers and sisters, before God, and then he is thrown down. And this is similar to how, as we saw in the previous episode, Satan was trying to accuse Job. Even though Job was a righteous man, Satan approached God to try to call out Job and to say that Job would curse God if he was inflicted with pain. And so it seems that even since the days of Job, Satan has had this ability to not only wander the earth, but also to wander the heavens as the accuser. And so this is very interesting. Look at what it says in verse 11 as it explains how he was dislodged from the heavens. And they, the saints, have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives even unto death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows his time is short. So here it seems that one of the reasons that Satan will be thrown down is not just because of an angelic battle, but also because of what? The blood of the Lamb and by the word of the people of God's testimony. So we again see that this must not refer to what happened before creation, because you are involved with the dislodging of Satan. Now, of course, before creation, Satan obviously had some type of falling out with God. We know that. But here we see that he is ultimately expelled by the blood of the Lamb and by the testimony of God's people. And that is big, because that would mean that your proclamation of the gospel is a part of the ultimate dislodging of Satan. You see why he doesn't want the gospel to spread. You see why he doesn't want videos like this to get out. Because the more he is exposed, the closer he is to being expelled. So I believe the puzzle is starting to fit together. Because if the battle of Revelation 12 climatically will conclude when Satan is dislodged completely from the heavenly realms and then comes into the earth realm, we can see why right after he is thrown to the earth, he's furious. And as it says in Revelation 12, woe to the earth. The devil has come down to you in great wrath because he knows that his time is short. And then after that, what does he do? He empowers the Antichrist to rise. And this is why we see that in the very next chapter in Revelation 13, the Antichrist comes onto the scene. Now, something else that I briefly want to mention here is right after it says that Satan was thrown down to the earth. Look at what it reads in Revelation 12, verse 9. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And so if we look at the Greek words behind this passage, it says the soteria has come, the dunamis, this is power. Soteria, that refers to salvation. And the word salvation there can mean salvation, which we know salvation we have in Christ. And salvation refers to what? Deliverance, safety, deliverance from the molestation of enemies. This is how that word is often used in Scripture to refer to really being rescued in a way. So when it says that now that Satan has been dislodged from his position, he's basically saying now the people of God can experience deliverance and they can experience power and the what? The authority of his Messiah. Interesting. And of course, there are many ways that you can interpret this, but I think one perspective to consider is that after Satan is thrown out and loses all of his level of authority in the heavenly realms, that likely will be the beginning of what? The tribulation. Because he will be thrown down to the earth, the Antichrist will rise, and what happens towards the beginning of the tribulation? The rising of the two witnesses. When the power of God, as it was shown in the book of Acts and in the days of Moses and Elijah, once again comes into the world to war against evil. So it is possible that the deliverance and the power and authority that will come after Satan is dislodged and completely thrown down is a reference to the power and authority that the witnesses of God will walk in thereafter. And so we actually did a documentary on the two witnesses, and I recommend watching that, especially part 2. In fact, you could just start with part 2 because I feel that that is in far more detail. It looks at not just the olive trees, the house of Judah and the house of Israel, but also it looks at the two lampstands in detail, and that is critical. And so please check that out if you would like to know more about the two witnesses. So yes, it is interesting how after Satan is ultimately removed from his position, that there is this empowerment that comes to God's people. And that seems to line up with what we know will happen during the time of the two witnesses. Now, we still have more things to walk through here in the text, because if the ultimate fall of Satan happens right prior to the time of the tribulation, well, what about Isaiah 14? Some of you mentioned Isaiah 14, which speaks of how Satan will be thrown into hell. Will that happen? Has it already happened? When will it happen? Let's look at it. So Isaiah 14, some people interpret Isaiah 14 as being something that possibly happened in the past. But I think in light of what we have just looked at here, that it is also possible that Isaiah 14 is a prophecy of what will happen in the future. So let's look at Isaiah 14, verse 13. Here is what the prophet Isaiah says concerning Satan. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. You said that I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. So here Isaiah is really forecasting the doom of Satan, and he explains how at one point Satan became very prideful, and God pretty much calls him out on that and says, no, yes, you wanted to be like the Most High and ascend above the angelic host, but no, you are brought down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit. So if this is a prophecy about the doom of Satan, what is Sheol? Well, when we look at the original Hebrew word for Sheol, and of course, I believe in the King James Version that would have been translated as either the grave or hell or even the pit. But the actual Hebrew word used there is Sheol, and that is often referred to as the underworld. Sometimes it is translated as grave, the pit. Usually it's used as the Old Testament designation for the abode of the dead. The Greek equivalent of it is Hades, or the world of the dead. So it says that Satan will be thrown into Sheol. Is he referring to just a grave? Well, or is he referring to some underworld, the abode of the dead? Well, let's look at the context of how it is used. So it says he will be thrown down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit. Those who see you will stare at you and ponder over you. It says he will be thrown down to Sheol, and there are individuals or spirits or souls who will stare and ponder over Satan and will say, is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook the kingdoms? Is this the one who made the world like a desert and overthrew its cities and who did not let the prisoners go home? This is the guy? Now, it says that he was thrown down to Sheol, right? And he was thrown down to the far reaches of the pit. Where is that? Where is that located? Well, in the last episode, we looked at how the fallen angels who sinned back in Noah's day were sent where? To Tartaro. And Tartaro in the Greek refers to the deepest abyss of Hades, which again is often referred to as the underworld. And we saw how the Apostle Peter wrote that some of the fallen angels were locked up in the deepest abyss of the underworld. And so that same language is used here as Isaiah prophesies that Satan will ultimately be thrown into the far reaches of Sheol, which many interpret as the underworld. So the ultimate question is, when does that happen? When will he be thrown into the abyss of Sheol? Well, again, we see that in Isaiah 14 through 16, he is thrown down. And when he is thrown into this pit, there are individuals there who see him and ponder over him. Like, is this the Satan, the great deceiver? And so this seems to indicate that when he is thrown into Sheol or the underworld, that this is not something that happened before creation, because when he is thrown there are individuals there questioning and pondering over him. That has to indicate that this is a prophecy of a future event. It's a prophecy summarizing why he was cast out of heaven, and it then prophesizes his ultimate doom, where one day he will be thrown into the abyss, the pit, the deepest abode of Sheol. So when will that happen? If it hasn't happened in the past, when will it be? Well, let's look at Satan's timeline. So at one point, Satan, he was in heaven. He was a beautiful angelic being. And then at some point, he began to realize that, and pride and jealousy possessed him. Jealousy of God. And so he had a falling out with God, and after that, he and the fallen angels that he convinced to take his side were kicked out of the highest heaven. and were allowed to roam the earth and the heavens. Now, just as we've seen before, even after he was kicked out, sometimes he would visit heaven to try and accuse the people of God like he tried to do with Job. But we know the day will come when he is completely banned from the heavenly realms, when Michael, the archangel, defeats him. And then Satan will be thrown to the earth. Satan will empower the Antichrist. And after the Antichrist rises and creates chaos, we know that then Jesus will return. And once Jesus returns, look at what Revelation says will happen to Satan then. Revelation 20, verse 1. And I saw an angel coming down out of heaven, having the key to the abyss and holding in his hand a great chain. Verse 3. And he threw him into the abyss and locked and sealed it over him to keep him from deceiving the nations any more until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be set free for a short time. So basically, we see here that at this point, when Jesus returns, then Satan will be thrown where? Into the abyss. Now, if you're reading along in the King James Version, it may read that he was cast into the bottomless pit. But again, if you look at the original Greek word there, the bottomless pit there is translated from the Greek word abyssos, which is where we get the word abyss. And so even in the King James Version, really all versions, the root word there is abyss. And what does that refer to? It refers to, of course, the bottomless pit, and it is used in the Bible to refer to often the lowest parts in the earth, the realm of the dead, especially the abode of demons. There are some who would argue that this is actually within the core of the earth or in the center of it. So we actually do have a video that explores where Sheol or Hades and the abyss might be in our earth. So please check that out. It is called Hell Explained Part 2. So I wanted to show that, yes, the word for bottomless pit here is abyss. And so we see that in Revelation, he will be thrown into the abyss or the lowest parts of Sheol, and that aligns perfectly with the prophecy in Isaiah 14, which says he will be brought down to the far reaches of the pit. And then it says that those who see him will almost be in shock. They will almost mock him like, this is the guy who deceived the world. So there you have it. Very interesting. And of course, if you have researched this, please share your insights as well. Now, it's time to go into depth on a few things. Because after the recent video, there were a few questions and a few comments which led, of course, to more Bible study and more prayer and more research. And so we have something that we need to look at here, and it regards the Nephilim. Now, in the previous video, we looked at a few theological perspectives on the Nephilim, demons, and fallen angels. And we started by examining Genesis 6. Genesis 6 tells the story of how the sons of God had children with human women, and that led to the women giving birth to Nephilim. And whenever you do research on Genesis 6 and you look into theological commentaries, when it begins to interpret the Nephilim, most theologians will often mention how this is similar to the language that is found in the book of Enoch. Well, the book of Enoch, as we know, is an ancient Israelite document that speaks of how long ago angelic beings who were referred to as the sons of God mated with humans, which produced these Nephilim. And so I think at this point we all are familiar with what the book of Enoch says. But how would you interpret Genesis 6 if you stick solely to the Bible? What would it mean by sons of God here? Well, one thing that you can do is cross-reference. So all we have to do here is type in sons of God, and let's see what that pulls up. And so, of course, in the Old Testament, sons of God, in Genesis 6, verse 2, this is referring to the sons of God saw the daughters of humans. Let's see, we see the sons of God also in Job 1:6. Look what it reads. It says, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came along with him." So in this context, the sons of God refers to angelic beings, and then Satan tried to worm his way among them. Also, we see in Job 2:1, it says, "And there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves to the Lord, and Satan also tried to come among with them." So again, this sons of God refers to the angelic beings. In Job 38:7, it says, "Where were you when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy?" So, of course, we know this is referring to angelic beings as well. Now, one day we're going to get into the New Testament and its usage of the sons of God, because it flips things around and says basically how we, as the children of God, can also be included in this. But in the Old Testament, the sons of God here primarily is used to refer to, as we see in the context, angelic beings. And so even if you're not looking at extra biblical ancient texts, you can reasonably come to the conclusion that the sons of God here are also likely referring to the same thing as sons of God usually refers to, angels. And this is why many theologians interpret the sons of God here as referring to angels. And so let's read verse 1. "When human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them as they chose. Then the Lord said, 'My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal, and their days will be 120 years. And in verse 4, it says, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them." The sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. The King James Version actually interprets this very well to say mighty. They were creatures of strength. So this is where people have questions and concerns, and it causes a lot of rift and confusion and hard contemplations, because you have to wonder, how is it possible for angels to have children with humans? Right? Like, clearly, it seems to indicate that the sons of God, which we see in the Old Testament usually refers to angels, saw the daughters of humans and then had children by them, which produced Nephilim. Why did that happen, and how did it happen? Do angelic bodies have the ability to reproduce? And if so, why? Right? We know if they weren't supposed to do that, why would they even be given that type of a body? That's one of the big questions that many ask. And I think it's a great question. You know, why would angels be given that ability if they were not purposed for it? And I guess, you know, my best shot at thinking through that is we do have to remember that angels are not like ghosts, right? They're not just disembodied spirits. They are spiritual beings. You know, you are a spiritual being. We all have a spirit. But we just happen to live in a human body. Angels are also spirits, but they live in a angelic spiritual body. A ghost or a spirit is something that is just spirit, but no physical, no body at all. And so angels aren't like that. They do have bodies, but a spiritual body. And a spiritual body is a type of body that is very unique. We looked at in the last video how often it can be invisible. Sometimes it can even go through objects, but it can also take on physical form if it wants to. And we see this numerous times in scripture. In Sodom and Gomorrah, there were angels who took on physical form. And once they did, some of the men in that region started to lust after them. And we also see how angels often take on some type of physical form whenever they are trying to deliver a message to the people of God. And one of the biggest eye-opening accounts is what is written in the book of Hebrews, chapter 13. Look at what it reads. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without even knowing it. Wow. So here the writer of Hebrews says that basically you better be careful how you treat people. Because angels have the ability to take on human form, and you may actually be interacting with an angel. So this is what the angelic body can do. Spirits don't have a body. They can't just morph into human form. Demons cannot do that. They have to try to possess a human body. They can't just create their own body and start showing up places. But a spiritual body can do that. And so if angels can take on human form at will, we see why their body could possibly take on human form if it wanted to, and perhaps even produce a child with it. Because apparently with the angelic body, there's not really any limitation as far as what their physical body could do. However, as we see here, if a human and an angel were to interact in that way, a Nephilim would be produced. And they are described as people that are mortal, absolutely, but a bit different and larger in size. Now, if you were to look at the King James Version in Genesis 6:4, instead of the word Nephilim, it will read giants. So if you were reading the King James Version, how would you have known that this is actually referring to Nephilim? Well, again, we can easily investigate that. All we have to do is just go to where it says tools here, and we see that the original Hebrew word there for giants was what? Nephil, which is where we get the word Nephilim. And this is one of the reasons why these Bible tools are so great. If you were to type in, let's see, the word giants here, you will see that it says giants in Genesis 6:4. We know that refers to Nephilim. But if you were to go to Deuteronomy 2:11, it says giants. But to go a little bit deeper, you would have seen that in that instance of the word giants is actually the Hebrew word Rapha'i, which is completely different from what a Nephilim is. And we are truly blessed that we live in a generation where we can see the original Hebrew and Greek words, because now we can see what the original author meant when he wrote the word giants. We know here it refers to Nephilim, here it refers to Rapha'i, which is really about just large beings, but here it gets more specific as to what was the makeup of these beings. So again, this is a great resource. It's free. And this is the Blue Letter Bible site. So definitely make use of these. And so now that we have looked at the sons of God and the Nephilim, we can tackle a very troubling thought. Okay, so some have asked this question, and I have pondered it myself. If the Nephilim who were produced in Noah's day were killed in the flood, why is it that they seemingly show up again at other parts of the Bible? Big question. Because we know that these creatures, they were killed in the flood, right? And certainly none of them were on Noah's Ark to survive that. So how did they come back? Well, let's investigate this. So again, we're in the King James Version here. We know that the giants here in Genesis 6:4, that refers to the Hebrew word, the Nephil, which is where we get Nephilim. We know that in Deuteronomy 2:11, that instance of the word giants refers to Raphael, which is a different context. Also, Deuteronomy 2:20, that refers to the giants, Raphael. This is also different. So what we want to do is find out, are there any instances of the word Nephilim other than just what is shown here in Genesis 6:4? Well, when we go to Numbers 13:33, we see that there are giants mentioned here. Let's see what the original Hebrew word for there was. So this instant of the word giants is, again, what we're looking for, the Nephilim. We want to see what the context of this is. So we know that now here it's referring to the Nephilim. So here in the book of Numbers, the people of Israel were on the verge of entering the promised land. And before they could enter, Moses commanded some of them to go and spy the land to make sure that it was safe for entry. And when these spies went out to view the land, there they saw Nephilim. And they were frightened and they were scared. They returned to Moses, and look at what they said. They returned to Moses and said, "And there we saw the giants, which we know are Nephilim, the sons of Anak, which come from the giants. And we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so were we in their sight." So this is interesting. They reported that they saw the Nephilim, the giants, and whether or not they actually saw original Nephilim or not, we see that these here, the sons of Anak, were the descendants of the Nephilim. And so if that is the case, it must indicate that at some point after the flood, the Nephilim must have returned, if they ended up having descendants and children who were living in the promised land. So how is that possible? How is that possible? Well, there are a couple of theories about this. One is that possibly the Nephilim survived the flood. Not sure how that might have happened. Some theories are that perhaps the fallen angels took some of the Nephilims away before the flood came and then brought them back. That's one theory. The second theory is that perhaps the Nephilim were reproduced after the flood. So which is it? Yeah, I had to do some research on this, but thankfully, some of you provided insight in the comments, and a few of you pointed out something that was pretty evident right there in the text. So let's look at it. Genesis 6, verse 4. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. So right here, it says in Genesis that yes, the Nephilim were around the days of Noah, but then even after the days of Noah, they were still around, and also afterward. How did that happen? How did that happen? It says it. And also afterwards, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. The ordering of the text is so critical. It says that they were here in Noah's day and afterwards. How? When the sons of God had children with human women. That is huge. Because what that means is that even after the flood, even after apparently some of the fallen angels had been locked away for sinning with women, apparently it happened again. And I assume it wasn't on a massive scale, but we do see that after the flood, some of those fallen angels were likely up to the same thing, making appearances on the earth, interfering with humanity, and even producing Nephilim. Which is why we see them again around the time of Moses. And so this is not an insignificant thing, because this would mean that it is possible that even after the flood, as long as fallen angels are around, they still could interact with people. You see how that would drastically change things? Because the question becomes, if fallen angels were able to produce Nephilim even after the flood, are they able to do it again, even now? That is the question. And I will say this. I will say, if you look at the very last scene of the previous episode, there is a message there. And that is why I always say that when you watch these episodes, it's not something that you can just have in your ear. You got to visually tune in, because the imagery there is very purposeful. And there is a quote at the end of the last episode from Christ about what will take place on earth right before his return. Look at what it says. Matthew 24:37. As it was in the days of Noah, so will it be at the coming of the Son of Man. So what does that mean? Some people interpret this to refer to how in the days of Noah there was fallen angel activity. And so possibly even in the end times leading up to Christ's return, there will be more fallen angel activity. That's one view. I personally am not sure what could happen, but I do lean towards this verse certainly hinting that just as it was wicked in Noah's day and in Lot's day, it will be very wicked on the earth prior to his coming. Absolutely. Will fallen angels have some part in that? We will see. We will see. Many of them who sinned back in Noah's day were locked up in Tartarus. We explored that in the last video, but we know that Satan and his fallen angels, some of them are still deceiving the world. That we have pretty much clarified with these past couple of presentations here looking at the text. Can they return, and to what capacity? We will see. But it is something to think about. It is something to discuss, and would love your insights on this and what you feel the Holy Spirit is speaking to you. This is a ministry where you are involved. People are reading your comments, and that is critical. That is very critical. And so now that we have gone over these things, we can now begin full production on the next episode, which will cover the Holy Spirit activity of the first century church. It will be a very important presentation. And if you would like to have some input with it, please consider joining us on Patreon. With Patreon, you are not only able to give and contribute to these projects, but you are also able to be a part of the process. You're able to provide feedback and even raise awareness of issues that we can discuss in upcoming episodes. And so it's a great opportunity for involvement. And so thank you for watching, and the next episode is coming soon. God bless.